interesting topic. I know we've been looking forward to having this topic covered in our series. Before I introduce our presenters, I just wanted to give you a quick overview of the program. GBI is a major USAID initiative coming out of EGAD that focuses on expanding access to telecommunications in the developing world and also the application of that access for development. Part of our mandate is to help provide information and resources so that you can better leverage ICTs in your work. Some of that happens through these tech series that happen every month here in the Ronald Reagan Building, and we cover a variety of topics ranging from telecommunications access to, like I said, the content and the application of that access. We also have the GBI portal, to advance here. We also have the GBI portal, which is available online. It's a massive website that tracks news and information and resources on ICT for D in all of the sectors. It has news and analysis as well as networking capabilities, so I really encourage you to take a look and to join as well. And when you do join, you can contribute your own content, so that helps us keep up to date on what's going on in your own offices and bureaus. You should have received 3 handouts today. One is an agenda of today's topic. Another is an informational page on GBI, and the third is a quick survey on today's event. So if you could take just a couple of minutes to fill that out at the end, that would be great. So now, to introduce our speakers. First, Ian Walter is the Vice President of Technology for Altobridge. It's a small firm that's just one of a handful of firms working on developing these low-cost, low-power demand technologies, communication technologies. Troy Etulain is the Senior Media Development Advisor here at USAID in Dacha. He'll be speaking about a project that I know a lot of us are really interested in the deployment of some of these solutions in the DRC. Eric White, my colleague, is the ICT sector economist for GBI, and he'll be speaking about the potential for these technologies across other sectors as well. So we're going to have the 3 presentations for about an hour, and then we have some time afterwards for Q&A. Because we have so much content and we have to try to squeeze it in, I'm going to ask the gentleman to keep it to 20 minutes, and I do believe we have a time card to help you. So with that, I'll go to Ian.
Wireless communications technology for remote communities. And we are deploying these solutions primarily in Asia at the moment, but also we're starting to deploy some of them in Africa. So a little bit about the market and the size of this market for remote communications. It's estimated today that there's over 5 billion mobile subscribers in the world, and this figure is growing at a rapid rate. And soon it's not only going to be people that are connected, it will be machines as well. You know, the mobile operators are looking at how do they get to the next billion subscribers? Where are the next billion coming from? They know that some of these are in these remote communities, but they're also talking about machine-to-machine communication. So soon your car's going to have a mobile device in it, and even your fridge is going to have a mobile device in it. It's estimated that currently today there's more subscribers in the developing world than there are in the developed world. If you take that 5 billion subscribers, probably about 2/3 of those are in developing markets. So, you know, there is a very big interest in the developing market. And when you look at these marketplaces, the developing world is the market that's expanding. You know, pretty much in the developed world, the market's pretty stagnant at this point. You know, some countries, you look at the subscriber penetration figures and you come up with, you know, 120% subscriber penetration, you know. So, you know, everybody's got a phone, their children have got phones, you know, they're everywhere. It's also estimated that the number of subscribers will exceed 6 billion by 2014. I think that's, you know, a very conservative figure. I think it's probably going to be far higher than that. But it'd be interesting to see, you know, what proportion of those subscribers are machine to machine as opposed to real human beings. For this to happen, though, the operators will have to deploy services in these more remote areas. And this is where, you know, there's a big challenge. How do you do that when, you know, there's no power to power the base station? There's no copper in the ground, or fibre, or microwave links are very expensive to get out there. And also when a lot of the current business cases the operators use to deploy their services don't apply anymore. You know, they're very much focused on when they deploy a base station, you know, how many subscribers are in the coverage area of that base station? How many new subscribers am I going to get? And if those figures are, you know, traditionally anything less than probably 1,500, they're not interested. But what we're looking at is getting down to, you know, 200 subscribers, 100 subscribers. How do we get to those villages in these really remote communities? So the GSM Association, which is essentially the trade body for all of these operators, have estimated that each year there's going to be about 75,000 off-grid mobile sites deployed in the developing market. So, you know, that gives you some idea of what's going on today, where the operators are targeting this growth. And the World Bank estimates that 3 out of every 4 people in the developing world live in rural areas. So, you know, while a lot of the operators in Africa have covered the urban areas, the big cities, the major cities, they're really not focusing on the small villages. And that's, you know, because of the issues that we talked about as far as lack of power, lack of backhaul, and lack of a business case that actually works for them. So extending those networks to poor rural areas proves to be difficult for operators in terms of business rationale and cost justification. So the key challenges, a combination of competition between the mobile equipment vendors and government subsidies and initiatives that have been put in place by the GSM Association have driven down the cost of the network infrastructure equipment to the point where it really is very, very cheap. When you look at the cost of building base stations today, the actual equipment cost is a small percentage of the total overall site cost. So if you're building a greenfield site where you're building a shelter, a tower, and all the associated equipment that goes with a base station, the actual base station cost is a very small proportion of it. So it's been driven right down. So it's not the cost of the equipment that's the issue anymore. And also from the subscriber side as well, there's been some very good initiatives from the GSM Association in getting the manufacturers to build low-cost handsets that can be sold into the developing market at a very small cost compared to what you would pay probably 5 years ago. So they have handsets today that, you know, retailing for anywhere between $20 and $40, and that was the target that they wanted to get to. But none of the above initiatives have really addressed the operational costs of these base stations once you deploy them. So, you know, what we're looking at here is, again, the backhaul costs and the power. How do you get there? How do you deploy it? And how do you operate it on a daily basis? And actually, from the operator's point of view, how do they still make money out of these? Because a lot of these sites that have been deployed in the past, the only reason that a lot of them have been deployed is because of government subsidies. You know, a lot of times, the operators, although they have an obligation to provide coverage in these remote communities as a part of their license requirements, whenever they're pushed to by the governments, they say, well, it's just, you know, it's not cost effective. We can't make money in these areas, and therefore we're not going to do anything about it unless you subsidise it. So what we're looking at is, how do we take that barrier of entry away? How can we go to those operators and say, look, yes, you can deploy these solutions, and yes, you can make money out of it without a subsidy. So the most expensive part of any of these remote sites deployments, if there's no copper, if there's no fibre, and if there's no microwave, is the satellite backhaul. And while we've seen a steady decrease in the cost of the terminals themselves, we're still seeing a fairly high cost for the actual usage of the satellite, the bandwidth cost, because a lot of the satellites out there, depending on where you are, they are bandwidth limited, and therefore it's a finite resource, and therefore it carries a high cost. So it's estimated that anything between 15 to 80% of the total cost of ownership of a base station is in the transmission costs. So at the low end, it probably means you've got copper or microwave or whatever, and at the high end, it's satellite only. That's the only way you can get there. And it's also estimated that a large proportion of this transmission cost is due to local traffic. So if you're in a village, then the chances are that you're going to be calling somebody else in that same village, or calling somebody else in the next village. And there's two issues there. One, that that's an inefficient traditional solutions. It's an inefficient way of delivering that call, because if you have a satellite, the chances are it's going to be a double satellite hop. So it's one leg is back over the satellite to be brought back to the same place over the same satellite. So not only is that expensive, it's also very inconvenient, because if you've ever tried talking on one of those long delay satellites, it's virtually impossible, because you're looking at 1.2 seconds of delay there to cater with. So this, in certain areas, has been estimated that this local traffic can be as high as 70 to 80% when you hub it together into villages. This really just gives some of the trends in the VSAT terminal pricing. This is a fairly old chart, as it only goes out as far as 2002, but what we've seen is this has pretty much leveled off at around 2,000, somewhere between $1,500 and $2,000 for the VSAT terminals themselves. So that equipment price has been driven down. So the other key challenge here is power for these remote sites. Almost all of these remote sites are going to be off-grid, and getting power to them is very expensive if it can be got there at all. So the operators have to look at alternative solutions to power these base stations. And these really fall into the following categories. So you have diesel generators, solar power, wind turbines, or a combination of those, so hybrid solutions. So there's a lot of momentum in this market. Again, there's another program within the GSM Association where they have a green power solution, where they're looking at the technology not only for the base station side of you, but also for the subscribers themselves. Because once you're in these villages with no power, how do you charge the handset? So they're looking at solutions for as far as charging the handset, and those vary from mobile phones which have solar cells built into the back of them so that they charge themselves, or hand crank solutions where you have a small generator driven by a hand crank that charges the phones. So a regular GSM base station, so when we're talking about the traditional solutions, they're drawing anywhere between 600 and 1800 watts of power. So that's a significant requirement that you have to get into that remote community. Generators are not, although they've been used extensively in Africa, are not really a viable option, because the logistics of refueling generators is huge. I think one of the operators in Nigeria a few years ago, they were actually one of the biggest distributors of fuel in the country, purely because they had to get out and refuel all of the generators on the base stations that they were using. And also, they had to deal with theft of diesel, theft of the generators. They were telling me stories about that they had fuel monitoring devices, remote fuel monitoring devices on the generators, and all of a sudden they would just see the fuel just drop to zero, and they knew that somebody was there actually stealing the fuel at that point. But there's nothing that they can do about it. By the time they get there, the site's been down for a couple of days, and they've had to they've got to go and repair the fuel tank and replenish it. So it's a very difficult solution to deal with. Solar power is probably the best solution, or a combination of solar and wind, depending on the location. But also, while the cost of the solar panels themselves have dropped extensively over the last few years, there's still a huge cost of the batteries that are required for the base station when, you know, it's either not enough sun to power it or at night time. So, you know, the more power efficient the base station is itself, then the less batteries you need, and therefore the cheaper the solution is. The site is also a key capex cost to be taken into consideration when deploying these remote base stations. So in a standard base station deployment, the tower cost can be very prohibitive. You know, you can be looking at anything from 100 to 250,000 in the civils, depending on the actual how high the tower is, and the cost rises very exponentially. So, you know, if you go from a 30-foot tower to a 100-foot tower, the actual amount of concrete that has to go into the foundations is huge. So, you know, keeping the site civil costs low as well has to be a key requirement for the operators, because, you know, that cost all has to be paid for at some point. You also have the issues of transporting all the materials to these remote sites. So if they're really remote and there's no proper roads to get there, it all has to be hand carried in. And, you know, we've deployed sites where, again, they get the materials as close as they can to the site, and then the only way to carry it in is, you know, by employing people to do it by hand. Also, you have to deal with, you know, issues like concrete. Concrete in human environments just goes solid if it's not protected properly. So it's lots of things like that that have to be taken into account. And on top of that, the site has to be secure, because equipment gets stolen in a lot of these environments. So this is a breakdown of the OPEX cost of the site. So we have power, 40%, satellite transmission, and site rental. So this is really what you want: a small, low-cost base station which is solar powered, has efficient satellite backhaul, and can support local calling between callers in the same village and callers in the nearby villages. And just to give you some comparison, it's always easier to do this when you have a visual picture of the sites. On the left is a traditional site that was deployed by Safaricom in Kenya back in the early 2000s. So as you can see there, that's probably a 30, 50-foot tower. It's in the base station equipment is in a 40-foot ISO container, and you've got a 2.4-meter VSAT dish. And then on the left, you have the sites that we're deploying today, which is a small monopole, an outdoor base station, so it's completely IP67, all outdoor, convection cooled, and a 1.2-meter VSAT dish.
Sorry, how tall is that, the mast?
I think the mast for that is probably 20 to 30 foot. We're normally 30 foot. It really depends. We try to keep them to a monopole to get as far as maximum range as possible. But you're probably limited to somewhere between 20 and 30 foot because of the wind loading of the antenna on the tower. But what we found is that is adequate for providing a range of about 5 miles in the village. And what we found is that a lot of times the villagers, if they're on the outskirts of the coverage, will actually come into the centre of the village to make phone calls.
You say 5 miles, you mean radius or diameter? Or?
Yeah, diameter. Radius. Yeah. So it's between somewhere, depending on the terrain, somewhere between 5 and 10 kilometres.
Miles or kilometers?
5 miles falls in between the two. And
5 or 10.
if you look at a lot of our because we're an Irish company, it always sends it in kilometres. 5 to 10 kilometres is generally what we say, but I would say 5 miles is probably in between there.
How short could you go with the mast and still get a range of a few miles?
You could put a very short mast up if it was on a hill. So you could put a very small. You could just put an antenna up there on top of the building if it was above the rest of the terrain. So it's really a case by case basis that we have to look at each site and see what the coverage is like, what the terrain is like, and we'll deploy the best solution based on that. So this is really just a summary of the operating expenses and the requirements. And this is good for the operators because this is one of our deployments. And I think each of the lines is a site. I believe this is in Malaysia. And what you can see here is that we've got some sites on the left-hand side which are generating $8,000 to $10,000 a month, down to the ones on the far right where we're probably below $1,000. But what we're seeing is that there's probably, if you look at the average figures, add up the voice and the SMS traffic, you're around sort of $3,500 a month. And what we're seeing that in some of these sites, the actual ARPU that we're getting from the subscribers is actually twice the national average. So there is disposable income there that people want to spend on making connections to the outside world. And the other interesting thing that we've seen as well is that there's no subscriber acquisition costs for the operators. We go in there, we put the site up, we turn the site on, and out of nowhere, the phones just appear. Because what we found is that the villagers have phones, but they're just not using them as a phone. So they're using them as cameras. They're using them as MP3 players. They have them.
Or when they go into town.
Yeah, or what they use them when they go to town. But they just have the phone there. We also find as well that from all of these subscribers are prepaid, but we find as well that what happens is that there will be an entrepreneur in the village who will go off to the next major city and bring back a lot of the recharge cards, and then will resell them in the village to the other villagers. So the operators really don't have to do anything apart from putting the base station there. The rest of it just happens through the natural ecosystem that's out in a lot of these small villages.
If these communities are off-grid, do you have a sense of how they're charging their phones?
We've seen in some of the villages where, again, there'll be somebody, an entrepreneur there that will have one of these bicycle generators, and they'll charge the other villagers to come along and have him charge their phones for them. So there's these types of initiatives. We have seen some of the sites where, because they've actually put solar panels in there and they have some power, that they provide charging stations as well for the villagers to come. Yeah, exactly. So that's.
I missed the beginning, so I apologize. It might have been in the beginning of your slide, but are you putting these towers up next to institutions or some secure place? Who's watching?
Some of them are in institutions. So we've done some where there's been a form of business there. So they have some sort of security compound, or the operator themselves has built a compound and maybe pays one of the villagers to keep a security on it. But what we designed these, so that most of this is above ground. So we put the base station up on the tower on some of the sites. That one was right at the bottom, but that was in a secure compound. We've done some sites in Indonesia where they have the operators put more substantial towers in, and the base stations are actually mounted on the towers. So, there's nothing really on the ground apart from the solar panels.
Yeah, I'm just curious because for a dozen years I was wind turbines and small anemometer stations out in rural areas, and you come back and they're always cannibalized. So
Yeah.
above ground doesn't mean much as when there's time and need for resources.
Yeah, but I think, we've seen some of this in some of the villages where the villagers themselves, because this brings them connectivity to the outside world, will protect the site. Now, they can't do that all the time, but we have seen instances that they will, certainly in Malaysia, in some of the sites that we've done there, that it's the villagers themselves that actually look after the site.
You said the traditional capex was 100 to 250K.
Mm-hmm.
What is it for your towers?
The actual site cost for the base station equipment, the tower, the VSAT antenna, the modem, and we put it all together with some fencing, is about $28,000. That doesn't include the solar power or the batteries, though.
Does that include configuration?
Sorry?
Is that just nuts and bolts, or does that include configuration?
Yeah. So it's very simple configuration. Basically, it's plug the Ethernet cable into the VSAT modem and plug the power in.
Calibrating?
Yeah, the rest of it's all done can be done remotely and monitored remotely. Okay.
Thank you.
It all started about 2 years ago, and we're talking about a part of Africa which is extremely remote. It's actually right in the middle of Africa. If you point at the middle of the continent, right where the borders of DRC, Sudan, and CAR intersect, is where a group known as the Lord's Resistance Army is still on the run, is still at large. It's a place with very, very little infrastructure, and very, very little in the way of communications. So in 2009, in December, there was an attack in which 300 people were murdered in multiple villages over a span of about 4 days, and just as many people were kidnapped and drugged and forced into the bush. The elderly were forced to carry things, as were the adults. Those who couldn't keep up were killed, and they were killed in brutal ways with machetes, sharp objects, clubs, rocks. Sometimes the LRA has a history of doing things like cutting off the breasts of the women who give birth to ethnicities that they don't like, cutting out the tongues of the people that they think are tattling on them, telling people about their locations, tying people to trees with barbed wire until they starve to death. It's one of Africa's longest running, sort of longest at large and most brutal groups. So they're from Uganda originally. They're sort of a quasi-Christian, quasi-animist group. But years ago, the Ugandan military was able to kick them out. But ever since then, they've been at large in southern Sudan, eastern CAR, and northeast DRC. So we were sent, initially, Daryl and I went to Kinshasa in, was it June of 2010, sometime about then, to conduct an initial assessment. And then in October, November of last year, we went out and I led a 5-person USAID team to go to the region in question and figure out just exactly what we might be able to do with communications. And we were basically technology agnostic. We wanted to put everything on the table. This is a map of that comes from the State Department. It's a map of attacks over a certain period. It's not the most recent map. It's just meant to demonstrate the kind of information we were dealing with when we initially made the assessment. So you see the little red flames are examples of actual instances of attack. It could be a kidnapping, it could be a murder, it could be a few different things. So this comes from December of 2009, 2010. So you see that this is, again, the CAR, Sudan, DRC is the area we're talking about. So we considered a number of technologies. Everything that we could think of, basically, that could have an impact. We tested, Daryl actually bought one of these spot trackers in the bottom left, the satellite warning beacon. We thought, well, maybe if there's an attack, we can use a satellite warning system, and so instantly the information would be conveyed. We thought about satellite phones, we thought about using shortwave information, and so on. And by the way, in terms of where this information would go, who would use it, who would respond to this information, there are three forces to consider. There is the Congolese army. There is MONUSCO, which is the UN entity in the DRC, which has military forces populated by other nations with military bases in these regions, small military bases in regions. And the third thing was the Ugandan army, which was actually present in the DRC in a very quiet way. The DRC, the Congolese government didn't like to talk about the fact that they had foreign troops on their soil because they themselves didn't have the capacity to respond to the threat. So after a lot of consideration, we field tested the spot tracker. By the way, I'll shoot it. Oh, it does come up on this map. Good. This is the the footprint of cellular infrastructure, and this is just from one company. This comes from GSMA. So you can see it's quite sparse. At the time of our study, the MNOs, the mobile network operators, were telling us, look, we're in a process right now of needing to increase the density of coverage in urban areas. So we're talking about an area which probably would not have gotten cell service for at least another 3 years. And of course, we have an immediate humanitarian threat that we wanted to address. Just some more background information. There are large footprint FM radio stations in the area, funded by MONUSCO. The idea is to send out, to conduct DD-RRR messages. That stands for deployment, disarmament, rehabilitation, reintegration, and return, something like that. The idea is to send out messages to the people in the bush saying, if you come back in, you won't be shot, you'll be given an opportunity to return to Uganda, and so there's no need to continue hiding in the bush. So that form of communication was going out there. But again, since it's FM, it's basically just a one-way form of communication. There's also high-frequency radio at a number of which has been used for decades by the Catholic Church missions in the region. It's basically a shortwave radio or ham radio because of its physical characteristics. You can talk for long distances, and it doesn't require a lot of power. So it actually made sense for this type of environment where there's little, not only road infrastructure, but also little electricity infrastructure. And in the end, we, after assessing all the possible communications options, we ended up deciding to do two things. The first one was to invest in a network of high-frequency radios in partnership with churches. You see, there are two provinces here. So Bach-Wele or Lower Wele, and Haut-Wele is Upper Wele. It's in reference to the Wele River. There are already two other efforts to install high-frequency radio networks in partnership with churches. One was funded by PRM, the State Department, Bureau for Populations, Refugees, and Migration. And the other one is funded by a San Diego-based NGO called Invisible Children, which had actually raised private money in order to support this. But Bach-Wele was an area where there'd been basically no attention from either of these groups. And so, and we found that the deployment model, they have this, what they call an early warning network. They would turn on the radios for half an hour in the morning and half an hour in the afternoon, and they just check in. Were there any instances of violence today? Any news? And then they would turn off the radio. And basically, it was just for the churches were participating in this early warning network, specifically Caritas. So we influenced them by asking them, well, do you really call it an early warning network when the radio's off for most of the day? So we convinced them to actually leave their radios on for the entire day and to keep them monitored. And our program, it again, is partnering with churches because really that's the only sort of administrative entity with whom you could partner in this remote part of the DRC. But we have done two things. We're facilitating community consultative processes. So communities can talk about what they would do in terms of a response to an attack or a response to an increase in their vulnerability. And the second thing we're doing is having them keep the radio on all day, but charge a minimal fee, 100 Congolese francs, which is about $0.1 of $1, and have that pay for the salary of the guy who has to sit there all the time. So we figure with a charging model, we could keep the system running.
Who's paying that?
Citizens. So
They
it's
wanna
a
make a message?
it's a
Send a
public
message.
access model. This photo right here is you can't see it, but that woman actually has a baby on her back, and the baby's sick, and she's radioing her mother in another village, asking her mother to send money for medicine. So that'd be an example of what they would use it for. And then we also we looked into research. We researched the possibility of cell towers, and initially we came across a really unworkable model. Looking at the pricing that the local MNOs might offer us if they just built a new tower out in the regions which concerned us, and we basically turned them down, and cell towers were off the table because of it. But then I did some more research, and I came across Altobridge's technology, and it's designed for exactly the type of the scenario, exactly the type of challenge that we are facing. So, in the end, through several conversations with various Altobridge colleagues in Ireland and around the world, we've decided to go with a pilot project with four BTS, by the way, base transmission station is just the industry euphemism for a cell tower. So this is where we started off in our research. All right,
So the MNOs didn't have any idea of that.
They had never heard of this technology. Strangely though, because it had already, I learned actually just recently that Altobridge is low. They have two sort of sides of the business, and what the low cost side had actually been used in Kenya by Safaricom, which is a Vodacom company. But we ended up we offered partnerships with all the MNOs in the DRC, and we ended up working with Vodacom. We should have been able, to transfer the information, but they didn't know.
I don't think they really talked.
I don't think they talked to us. So this is what we said no to, essentially, right? $535,000 per tower. They were going to build the stuff in Kinshasa, ship it up the river, the Congolese River,
And that doesn't even include refueling.
and for a lot of their current towers, which have been deployed with this model, they to get the diesel to their generators, they bring it by motorcycle, by bicycle, and by foot. And we're talking about an area where it's kind of like shark-infested waters in terms of there being piracy on the road and bandits and stuff. So it just wasn't a model. So this is what, with the per tower rate here is with solar power and with batteries and some installation. We selected sites which all have dirt airstrips, so we can fly this stuff there. And MONUSCO has offered to fly the equipment to the sites for us. So we have a partnership with the UN for this pilot project. And not to repeat what Ian has already said, but obviously it was a workable option. USAID DRC gave us 1.25 to play with, and so we split it between these two projects. So these are very approximate costs, but because of the high connectivity costs for satellite backhaul and the diesel fuel, that's how much a tower was costing roughly Vodacom at a remote location. And this is what we are going to be looking at. So the implications are that we are now employing a commercially sustainable humanitarian project in the remote part of DRC. We basically are paying for the towers. Vodacom commences commercial service. In addition to that, for 2 years, they agreed to basically link in these towers to their network in an area which would have not had commercial service for another 4 to 5 years. And they also have agreed to pay for 250 subsidized telephones per town. So they're buying 1,000 phones. And actually, I don't even know that they needed to do that. We kind of just wanted them to kick in something. And so it wasn't even my idea. Someone in Kinshasa wrote that into the agreement, and they said, oh, okay. And so we said, oh, they agreed to it. I guess we'll leave it in the agreement.
So is that net operating costs after taking away the revenue from local telecom, the 500?
That's not revenue. That's just
operating costs. So
that's
not
OpEx. Monthly OpEx.
Okay.
So if you go back to ours,
Could be lower.
where you're looking at 3,500 average revenue,
Right.
they're going to be making
They could.
3,000.
So
But would that
yeah.
work here? I mean, maybe that wouldn't be.
It would. So suddenly, a smaller town in a remote location looks profitable to the company because of lower capex and lower opex. For us, it's a humanitarian thing,
Yeah.
right? So
Can you
this
talk
is
about capacity difference?
what I think 250.
Yeah, the small site, the one outdoor pod, is a 2 TRX solution. So that supports probably around about 300 subscribers. We
How many simultaneous calls?
It's what is it, 14 simultaneous calls. Now, I mean, we can increase the capacity by enabling half rate voice on there. So it's a lower quality voice, but you double the capacity on it. So it can go to 28 simultaneous calls, which would support around about 1,000 subscribers.
So really, I think one of the big savings is the local switching, right? I call you, I'm standing next to you, call goes all the way back to Kinshasa and back without local switching. But if I'm standing next to you and then the tower realizes it, the Kinshasa is told that I've initiated a call so they can start billing me, but then the call is routed locally. And then you don't pay for the signal to go from the base station where I'm at to Kinshasa and back. So it's really a beneficial thing about the technology. So this here, just to sort of drive it home, this is a heat map of instances of violence reported since the beginning of this calendar year by Invisible Children, one of the implementers of the project I was telling you about. This is on their recently launched website, which is aimed at a U.S. audience. It's very Java and Flash heavy. But so these are where we're putting the towers, in the most dangerous areas. And it's going to be commercially sustainable.
And there are no towers there now.
There are no towers, and they wouldn't have
So
them
you don't
for
know
years.
how the LRA is going to react to the towers.
We don't know. But one of the things I wanted you'd ask the question of. Oh no, I guess it was Tricia asked the question. Our partner in these locations is going to be again the churches. So that does two things for us. The churches, the buildings are located on the highest points in the towns already, and then they have a structure built on top of them. And so we're very likely going to put a pole on there to take advantage of those two things. And because of there being constant human presence at the church, they're going to be helping us with security. That's our paradigm for security and propagation characteristics.
Is it, again, even when the village benefits, there's always those that need to come
Yeah.
right
Yeah.
the next town over, or those that are just taking
Yeah.
Well,
So-
and it's not inconceivable, too, that you're going to start running into the same problems that we have in Afghanistan, right? Where it's not just the physical security, but you actually have the insurgents thinking or knowing that this technology is being used to help track them.
It's not going to be marketed as such.
Yeah, well, that's a good decision.
It's just expanding cell coverage.
Yeah, no,
as
I'm
far
just
as
saying,
we,
As
far as we
I'm
know,
not
the
saying don't do
LRA
this, this
carries
is
cell
brilliant,
phones in
but-
their products, in their pockets, and they use them because they roam around in multiple countries, and they do come across like a signal from time to time. One other thing I wanted to mention, so this is under the rubric of what we're describing as early warning. We do hope that this will eventually save lives and so on. But really what we're trying to do is decrease the amount of time of those reports. Remember how I started and I said it took 3 weeks for the outside world to know of an attack? We want it to be less than 24 hours. We basically want to take a 1 megapixel picture and make it a 10 or 20 megapixel picture on the activity of things in this region so that further humanitarian programs can be planned. This is a meso step. That's how we view it. We don't mean to overpromise what this network of, it's just 4 towers, right? The 3 over here are along one big road, so there will be sort of a network effect we hope there. In any case, so these are what we hope, this is basically what we hope to achieve. I think what we're going to definitely achieve commercial success. The money USAID is giving is going to Vodacom. We dictated the technology, so they're already in negotiations with Vodacom's Africa sales rep. And then Vodacom will come in, train their staff, and their staff will deploy the technology. And by the way, the switcher that we have to buy that goes in Vodacom's headquarters will accommodate over 100 other BTSs.
Mm-hmm.
So now, any other project for any other theme that USAID DRC is doing, or by that matter, any other development donor in the country, they can add a cell tower to their project affordably. And that's, I don't want to sort of steal Eric's thunder, but this is a copy of this slide. I thought that may be a nice takeaway.
So if this is profitable for Vodacom, and if the UN would pay for the initial transport of that equipment, given it the more towers, the better, would they do that? Then wouldn't Vodacom have the incentive to just extend its service?
Vodacom has the incentive to do it all over the country, irrespective of the LRA.
But they're not paying. We're paying for the upfront cost now.
Right. We're paying for these.
The issue winds up being low-hanging fruit, high-hanging fruit, is that
Yeah, there's other
they
places
need so
to,
much
yeah.
build-out in higher density, higher income urban
okay.
centers, that's where all their capital is
okay.
going at this
Right.
moment.
They're
Eventually,
Other than
they'll be the
this.
first to tell you, we'll eventually get there.
Yeah.
But the issue is, what's the
Right.
value of accelerating that?
Right.
You know, and in
They'll,
this case,
they'll be
This makes it-
working on providing 3G coverage and 4G
Yeah.
coverage.
before
in
they
major
get, that's
cities
true,
That's
that's
right.
absolutely
before
true.
they get to the
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
parts
Well,
of the
for
country.
commercial reasons, then it's.
Yeah, it's just pure
Yeah.
commercial.
So the point is that once now that the capital operating expenditures are the market is providing for them, any other form of development could consider just throwing a cell tower into their program design. And then you start, then the magic of the connections work out, and we have a lot of experience doing all of these things in various countries around the world.
And Kay, are what are you doing in Afghanistan like this, or why wouldn't this work, or what are you facing there that you think, yeah, sure, that wouldn't work, or whatever?
No, I'm actually pushing this quite hard.
Okay.
We're
Okay.
The U.S. military is spending a tremendous amount of money building a parallel system that nobody's using because of the threats to the operators from the insurgency. And it seems to me, just in terms of having a much smaller footprint and much less capex involved, that this is actually a much better solution. We're sort of, and Daryl's involved in some of these conversations right now.
Good.
For sure.
Troy, I don't have the answer for Michelle, so it's not a dating question, but have we looked at, in Nepal and Mindanao, areas like that, where we've installed, not we, but we, the communities, could have been from DFID or World Bank or government themselves, installing towers, whether it be cell operated or whether it be energy related, see what the rebels have done in those areas, because that's for remote.
I don't know the answer to the question.
Whereas I think Afghanistan is honestly on a much larger level and a little bit more skilled and qualified to be banging down some of the infrastructure we're seeing now, and Nepal is more of the on the move type of. Just wondering if that's something we should look at and say, to sort of hedge what will happen if we go in.
Yeah, we recognize that there's a danger. The danger assessment, the sort of the risk assessment we had at the time was that the LRA weren't making it had been a long time since basically 2009 that they had a really vicious in-town attack because of the presence of the Congolese army and the Ugandan army. They were only sort of picking off people who had gone to their field 5 or 10 kilometers outside of town. And so we thought, well, for them to launch an attack on a town and go after this communications infrastructure was less likely than it had been a few years ago. We didn't study the cases of Nepal or Philippines, to be honest.
I don't think you would study pre-purgatory, but I just think it's maybe something.
It might be
to
interesting.
look through,
Yeah.
so you can see what opportunities may exist.
Just maybe to wrap up so I can give Eric a chance to go. I guess.
That's awesome.
And I have another another picture where it says African presidents, and they have all the African presidents, and they have Obama in the middle.
So did you put this together as a kit for other donors' projects so that it makes it really easy for them to do this?
Put it together.
I mean,
as a kit.
so that, you say, here, you can get a tower,
Sponsor a
blah,
tower.
blah, blah, little, well, not a physical kit, but a list that says, all you have to do is do X, Y, Z.
Well,
order this, order
Altobridge
that.
has that pretty well
Yeah.
packaged together.
Yeah.
Because you've got some stuff in Niger.
In Nigeria,
Indonesia.
with Orange. So what
Yeah.
we've done basically in Africa at the moment, we took the equipment to Orange's test lab in Paris, and it has been approved for deployment across all of the Orange properties in
Right.
Africa.
Yeah.
But it's taking that and actually getting them to now give the go-ahead. Which
But here's the other nice thing I like about Altobridge, and recognizing that there are other companies in this space. But like when I was just in South Sudan and we met up with Zane, and Zane is doing a massive build-out in South Sudan, new switching center and all that stuff. So when we talked about, would you be interested in rural, the answer was absolutely, since most of Sudan is rural. You know,
right.
so I mean, it's
We're in
like,
South Sudan. So.
yeah, exactly. Yeah, it's a dumb question, you know. But anyway, in the course of that, but we got the same response. We would love to work with you on this. We really think that that's part of our future. However, we're so consumed with getting our new switching center up, covering urban areas, you would have to take that and offload it from us. Okay, if you could figure out how to do that, we would love to work with you. And you can, and that's part of your business model.
Yes, because one of the business models that we deploy in Malaysia is that we operate the network on a managed service basis. So what we've done for Maxis in Malaysia is we said, right, all you need to do is provide us the link into your core switching network. The piece of equipment that on Troy's presentation is 125K, we put that in there ourselves. And then we will actually go out, we'll do all the site deployments. We partnered with one of the local VSAT providers. So a lot of the sites, they already have the VSAT equipment there. We trained the VSAT installers to install our equipment. And basically they will install the equipment. If there's a fault on the equipment, they'll go out and repair it. And what we do is we charge Maxis so much a month per TRX, and that's it. So Maxis doesn't have to do anything.
Yeah.
We do it all for them.
Yeah.
That's one business model, and the other one is you basically give the M&O the equipment, and then they'll Altobridge will charge sort of like call center fees basically for technical support,
Right.
which is more the one we've chosen. Yeah.
Right.
So this is a whole nother presentation into itself. Just to put a list on there, this is where the magic really happens. You know, once you've got connectivity, the application of phones, and a lot of us I know focus on that, and it's just exciting. We hope that this proof of concept in DRC will stimulate a lot of copycats, basically, for the purposes of development.
Yeah.
Okay, so thanks.
I know a fair number of faces in here, but for those of you who don't know me, my name is Eric White. I am the ICT sector economist for the Global Broadband Innovations Program, working for Integra LLC, one of the program implementers. Just want to follow up rather briefly to these two very interesting presentations that we've heard so far about kind of what low-cost, low-power telecommunication solutions are, and one particular way in which they're now being implemented. And I just want to talk about a couple of other ways in which they may be implemented to demonstrate the real broad applicability of these types of solutions. And to understand that, you really just, like Troy was saying, have to understand that this is really all about connectivity, and it's specifically about connectivity in the most remote locations. GBI is an organization whose one of our driving purposes in life is to expand telecommunications access. And we've got three primary tools through which we do this. One of them is working with regulators to try and create the right sort of business environment. One of them is working with something called Universal Service Funds, which is sort of a smart subsidy that takes geographical regions where the population is concentrated enough and rich enough that they could pay enough for service to cover operating costs, but an operator would never recover its capital expenditures, so you subsidize that at the beginning and it becomes a profitable enterprise. But then there's regions where, with the current technologies that operators are using, if they were to go there, they would lose money on the margin. And so if you're going to provide coverage in those areas, you have to fundamentally change the economics of the whole situation, which means new technology, which means this type of connectivity solution, and that's the only way you're getting out to the most remote locations. And so why do you want to do that? Well, connectivity is good for a couple of things. Economic growth, which I'm going to spend a little bit of time talking about. Better service delivery, which I'm going to spend a little time talking about. All of these things interact in a way that creates development, which is what we're here for. So first, economic growth. And I'm going to talk largely about agriculture because we're talking about the rural edge. And that's 95 to 99% of the economy in those places. But I risk there's somebody in this room that knows way more about agriculture than I do. So
ICT and ag.
she's going to keep me in check. Before we start,
I'm taking good notes.
I know a few of you have seen this graph before. This is just kind of macro level economic benefits of connectivity. There's a World Bank study done in 2009, big regression, found a 10% increase in connectivity is associated with a 1% increase in economic growth. And we find this at both the macro and the micro level, and I'm going to sort of talk about how it works at the micro level now, using agriculture mostly as a demonstration. So income, I come from an economics background, so I always have to put an equation on the board. Income is a function generally of productivity, human capital, and investment. And economists are always arguing about the specific way in which these interact to create growth. But for our purposes, it doesn't matter because ICT improves all three. Lowers search costs and transaction costs. Search costs are the cost of finding information. Transaction costs are the cost of executing transactions, which means you save money that can be invested in other things. Workers are more productive. So productivity improves. Increases the rate of social learning. You can find things out more quickly, integrate new knowledge into your business practices. We have better human capital. And lowers risk through a number of different mechanisms, thereby increasing people's willingness to invest. So, rural productivity in terms of search costs. The first thing we put up here is voice. We call it the killer app because we always talk about apps in this kind of field. But voice is really still the primary method through which people obtain information. If you want to, for example, find out, people always talk about market prices or find a buyer. You can do it just by calling somebody. Or you can do it through a specific service that's targeted to meet that need for you, that is operated either by a company or by an NGO. One that frequently gets talked about is called Isoko. It offers a number of tiers of services, but at its most basic level is simply a text service that provides information to farmers in very remote areas about how much they can get for their crop in different markets that they have access to. eChopal is a service in India that's based on kiosks that can also be connected via these types of connectivity solutions. It's not just cell phones that you can connect. You can connect what we call customer premise equipment that can get wired off into computers. And you could have a kiosk run off of these types of things that does a similar type of thing. eChopal has an interesting model where they'll actually volunteer to buy your product off of you if you can't find a buyer that will buy it at a fair price. So that's a little bit different. Transaction costs. Secure monetary transactions, M-Pesa, everybody knows about, the huge thing in Kenya, right? What this means is you don't have to travel somewhere to meet somebody to get paid and risk getting robbed on the way back. You can get paid over the phone. Improving human capital. Social learning. A great example of this is the gap that was left in farm extension when the state left agriculture in most of sub-Saharan Africa in the late 80s and early 90s with structural adjustment. Nobody came in to do this type of work because it wasn't profitable. But now what you're finding is over the phone, NGOs and other types of organizations, including the government in some cases, can offer disease identification or best practices to farmers that greatly improve the productivity of their plots, which is economic growth in rural areas. And then reducing risk, forward contracts, input verification. The last time I was in Mali, I talked to somebody about a big problem they were having there, where there was a company that was supplying fertilizers and pesticides to extension agents who didn't know where they came from, and they were actually poisonous and they were killing crops. And there's systems where you can scan barcodes and check to make sure that the package is verified. Warehouse receipting systems. M-Insurance. This is Kalimo Salamo, which provides insurance over mobile phones to farmers based on weather. And it makes them more likely to use things like fertilizer, because if it rains shortly after you put the fertilizer down, you lose the money that you spent on the fertilizer, and the fertilizer gets washed away. So they will make payouts based on weather. So risk reduction equals more willingness to invest. And the things I've talked about, I've just talked about a couple of apps. There are hundreds of these mobile products that you can use as a farmer in a very remote area to improve your productivity, social learning, or reduce your risk to increase your ability to invest. But you can't use any of them without connectivity. So we're not pushing any single app here. This is just an attempt to demonstrate the possibilities that exist when you connect a village. Now I'll talk a little bit about better service delivery. Health is an area that USAID spends a lot of time focusing on, delivering better services. You can do a number of things. Strengthen health systems. Report outbreaks. Do behavior change communication about, okay, well, I really should be doing this with my new baby. This is the MAMA initiative that USAID recently launched. much. So aid is in this space. Telemedicine. Mobile Medic does a lot of this. This Mobile Medic is a spin-off of a large organization called Frontline SMS. Well, not large, but well-known organization called Frontline SMS that offers a whole suite of products that kind of work all throughout the health system over mobile phones. And some of these are starting to be built locally. So this is sort of the interaction of economic growth and better service delivery. This Med Africa is a locally developed application that is a business that has been started by somebody in Kenya that allows, that provides information on doctor and hospital listings, drug authenticators, symptom checking for self-diagnosis, that kind of thing. Education is another big area where we can have improved service delivery using mobile phones or using connectivity. So like I mentioned before, you don't just have, it's not just mobile. You can use low-cost, low-power base stations to connect schools. And that's the Magalawa, my Portuguese is terrible, I can't pronounce that. It's an Intel program for doing school computers. You can do teacher attendance monitoring. I think this one's really interesting. There was a very famous study that was done a couple of years ago where a school in India was connected, a couple of schools in India were connected, and teachers were given cell phones and told to take a picture of themselves at the school with the class and have the phone date stamp it, and they had to send it to the district office every day to make sure that the teacher attended school, which is a huge problem. You can pay teachers using the type of mobile payment systems like M-Pesa that we see in Kenya. This is happening in Rwanda. There's a pilot or two there.
And in Afghanistan.
And in Afghanistan.
Really?
Educational games. There's one that I've seen. I don't know, anybody ever play Math Blaster as a kid? Maybe a younger generation. Yeah. Where it's a computer game where you could learn how to do math problems. You just put problems on your phone and you could sit there and it was like a game and you get prizes if you got the problem right. You can do this kind of thing on a phone. And then literacy improvement. It's a shame Joshua Haynes left because I was going to give him a shout out. When he was at Tufts, he worked on a project called Project ABC, which is it's a French acronym that I can't remember at the moment. But it was a project that they deployed in Niger that used text messaging as part of a program of adult literacy. And so students in the program would go to a classroom setting, have reading lessons, and then they would have homework assignments that involved texting. And then they would text each other. And they found that the more that they used this type of service, the better they retained the knowledge that they learned in the classroom. So there's all kinds of things you can do with better service delivery. And so this is just a few things, a few reasons why you may want to consider integrating connectivity more broadly into projects, and just a small description of what GBI is and what it can do for you. We do have a mandate from Aid Washington to work with these types of LC/LP vendors, facilitate deployment of these technologies. We have the portal, which Lori showed you at the beginning of the presentation. Very valuable resource. Pages on most sectors in which USAID works, and there is the possibility of tailored consulting to missions and bureaus on these types of things. That's it. These are the contacts that you need to know, and I guess I and probably the other presenters are happy to take any other questions that remain.